Thank you so much for clicking on my video. And if you're returning, welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about Live to Lead, presented by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It's on Netflix and it debuted today. It's 7 episodes detailing a different leader in their own right and their story. If you have not seen this, there will be a lot of spoilers. So I recommend watching Live to Lead on Netflix first and then coming back and checking out my recap. But if you have watched it, go ahead and stay tuned. So let's get into this. Once again, thank you so much for clicking on my video. If you have not already, feel free to go ahead and like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on that notification bell. If you're interested in becoming a member, hit that join button. And if you want to see what I'm doing over on Patreon, use the link in the description box below. I want to say a big hello to the friend circle as well as the Patreon members, and I'm going to curtsy to the Royal Court, my membership group. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel, as well as everyone who watches and has subscribed. So today I want to talk about Live to Lead, the documentary on Netflix presented by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. I thought this was an excellent show of leadership. It's 7 episodes detailing the lives and the story of different leaders. Some I was very familiar with, some I was not. So it was a really great learning opportunity. I like documentaries a lot. So I was already pretty partial to this, but one of my favorite parts of the documentary right off the bat was that they told us what they were doing with it, as well as the why. They let us know right off the bat this was inspired by Nelson Mandela. And when you get to the 7th episode, that is a huge full circle moment. So right off the bat, they had me. And we're going to go episode by episode and kind of recap, not everything. So with a recap, I can't give you every detail, but feel free to go ahead and watch the documentary and then come back for my thoughts on each episode. All right, so we're going to start with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She actually was supposed to record a lot later than she did. However, she reached out to the team and they were able to move up her interview date because it turns out that she had an illness. That was the beginning of her illness. And she wanted to go ahead and get this done. And the fact that it mattered, and even in a moment where she could have been thinking inwardly and thinking about her own sickness or what have you, she was still concerned about others and still concerned about her contribution and still trying to help and still trying to do what was needed. And so I thought that was an amazing thing to share for them because it may seem small, but it's just so indicative of who she was and the legacy that she still carries. So who is Ruth Bader Ginsburg? She was a Supreme Court justice and a feminist icon. She was nominated by President Bill Clinton for Supreme Court in 1993. She spent 10 years litigating for gender discrimination cases, and she was one of 4 general counsel to the American Civil Liberties Union. One of the things that struck me immediately were so many quotes. She had, like, my entire note section for Ruth Bader Ginsburg were quotes that I'm going to take away. So I'm only going to share a few so that we're not here all day. I know it's New Year's Eve and y'all have stuff to do. So, but I will share, some of the ones that stuck out the most to me. One of the quotes that she started this with was her mother telling her, "A lady doesn't give way to emotions that sap energy and do no good." I thought this was an amazing way to start off her segment and the whole series at large, because it is very difficult for me. This is like a personal thing. It is very difficult for me to look past things that tick me off. And I have known that this was a problem for me for a long time. And not everything bothers me, but I have like those 1 or 2 things that always get an emotional reaction. And I love that she said that her mother told her, "A lady doesn't give way to emotions that sap energy and do no good." That last part is the most important. It doesn't do any good to get beside yourself. You aren't in the right frame of mind. You aren't able to use, logical thinking to make the next move the best move. And one of the things that they showed us right after giving us that quote was the many times Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been challenged or in some way I felt condescended to at the hearings, and how she calmly, gathered her thoughts, showed no emotion, and responded with a wise, smart, and elevating remark. And when I say elevating remark, she elevated the conversation back to the adults' table every single time. She definitely brought common sense into the room, and she conveyed it in a way where you could read and take note. And so just seeing that in action, that was already like, it captivated me. I learned so much, and it just put that back on my mind of like, in this new year, you're putting up your goals. Don't forget to make that part of self-development a priority. But she took us on her journey to becoming a lawyer. And she talks about how she was so inspired and she did great in law school. But despite how well she performed in law school, she didn't get a single job offer. Some of the things that she attributed that to were the biases that were very present then. She was a mother, she was Jewish, and so there was anti Semitism, and she was overall a woman. And some people even said, we tried hiring a woman once, it didn't work out. And I just thought, one, my, how times have changed. And then two, wow, how they have not. She then takes us through her journey with the women's movement overall. And she was telling us how gender equality, the whole movement in and of itself, was very dismissed at first. And the barriers, well, it was often referred to, were what we perceived as women as barriers. Men would kind of counteract that with the narrative that no, these aren't barriers, they're protection. We're doing this for your protection. And one of the things that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said in her hearing was, how many things are you protecting us from? Equal pay, or jobs that pay a substantial salary or pay time and a half. You protect us from working overtime. And so these weren't protections. These were obstacles, intentional obstacles. One of the things that she also said, one of the quotes that I took away was, the woman was not on a pedestal. She was, in fact, in a cage. And that stuck with me. But in addition to being a huge participant and a leader in the women's movement, she also represented men. And I was glad that they included that in this docuseries, because a lot of times when people hear, oh, they fought for gender equality, or they fought for women's rights, or feminist icon, the thing that resonates with people, and it's this assumption and this stereotype, is that she must hate men. These things don't benefit men. And one of the things that I felt episode 1 with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of the things that resonated over and over and over, which I already knew this, but I was glad that it was so apparent in this episode, was the fact that human rights benefit everyone. Oppression does not benefit anyone in the long term. It may be easy for some people in the moment, but overall human rights and equal civil liberties affecting everyone in a positive manner helps society. It's good for everybody. And so in that same vein, women's equality helps everyone, not just women, although that is reason enough. But she also represented men. One of the cases that she talked about was a man who was widowed and received no child care benefits, because it's often assumed back then that the breadwinner was the husband. So there were no child care benefits for widowed men, in the same way that there would have been benefits for a woman who was a widow, because her husband would have been assumed to be the breadwinner. I thought that was an excellent case to highlight and to put in this documentary, because again, it's showing that there is a necessary goal behind it, where there's a necessary outcome, which is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We should not be oppressed, no matter how you try to sway logic. The truth is the truth. Equality helps everyone, but again, oppression helps no one. She had a special part in her segment about her husband, Marty. And I thought this was a very sweet segment. I was really glad that in that 30 minutes, we were able to get so much depth, and we were still able to get the human side. And there was this joke that she used to cook during the week and her husband cooked on the weekend, and her daughter let her know swiftly that daddy should do the cooking all the time. And she said she never cooked while she was in Washington. I thought that was a very funny story. But before they even highlighted Marty, They showed a few segments of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in a hearing, and behind her, you see someone literally facially, all the expressions are just in support, and it's giving very much like, I know that's right. And so I looked and I said, I bet that's her husband. And then they highlighted, and it certainly was Marty. He was very supportive of her. Hearing her talk about his passing was very, very tough, but it was very sweet to hear her talk about him like that after all this time. She also highlighted Evelyn Ginsburg, Marty's mom, which was her mother in law. And she said that the advice that was given to her by her mother in law was the secret of a happy marriage. Sometimes it helps to be a little bit deaf. And basically, that means don't take everything they say to heart. Sometimes it's okay to kind of overlook when they're having bad days and they may lash out, obviously within reason, but like let people be human. They're not always going to be their best. And strive to see the good and work with the things that are constructive. And she said she applied that logic to her time in the Supreme Court. And we see the result of that. She was an excellent person to reach across and bring everybody into the conversation and use everybody's input to help create change that affects everyone in a positive manner. One of the things that she said the world could use a lot more of was listening. She said, it's important to not just talk to like-minded people, but to applaud differences, yet still come together. She said her biggest challenge was losing her husband. And she said the things that have mattered the most to her during her life were when she had the opportunity to help the movement for change. She wanted to ensure that daughters were just as cherished as sons. And she said, women are welcome in all space. Women should be welcome in all spaces, and there should be no artificial barriers. And I could not agree with you more. This is still an issue that is present today, where people literally still are like, well, I give more resources to my son because we're the most alike. It's just like, even after all this time in 2022, people are still using that age-old adage of just like, women are hard to raise and boys are easy. It's just, I've never understood that, because I would hope that you're putting the same intention and care and attention into raising both children. But it's just interesting how so many people can, in their minds, justify giving more resources, more attention, more time, and more energy into raising sons versus their daughters. And so that line stuck out to me a lot. And one of the quotes that she left us with was this one: always do something outside of yourself. You're a member of a community. You are blessed with having certain talents. You should use your education and your talent to help make things a little better for people who are not as fortunate as you are. I felt like that was the perfect way to end her episode. And I definitely felt like, knowing that she has since passed, seeing her on this documentary again, and seeing her active and seeing her passion, it was really good to be reminded of her presence after, since it's been a little bit of time since she's passed, especially with the goings on that were happening at a certain point in our government. And I'm glad that we are on the upside of justice with what was going on in our government at that time. But it was really nice to see her and be reminded of humanity in government. Episode 2 gave us Greta Thunberg. If you have not seen her or know who she is, she recently was all over the news and social media for owning Andrew Tate. He is a social media influencer and misogynist. Proud misogynist. He's also said a number of really nasty things about a lot of women, particularly women in power, and notable women. And he recently got arrested for alleged human trafficking. So she's been having a good week. and he's been having a terrible week. But outside of that, if you do not know who Greta Thunberg is, she is a Swedish climate and environmental activist. She fights for climate change, and she began demonstrating outside of the Swedish parliament. She is a child. She is actually the only child on the series right now in the first 7 episodes. And if you thought that was impressive, wait until you hear the rest of her story. I found her to be extremely compelling to learn more about. especially the fact of hearing her background and how she got involved with the type of work that she does. She said that she was inspired when she was in school around the age of 8 or 9. So I thought that was an amazing note to put into her episode, because it shows that you don't have to be this super well connected or this super rich person. You can do something about your circumstances at any time. You can always say, I've had enough. You can always say, I want to get involved. You can always put your effort and your energy and your sweat and tears behind what's actually impassioning you. So I thought her story was one of the most inspiring of the series. And so I'm excited to talk more about it here. In addition to talking about what inspired her, she gave us more detail about that by saying that she was she was moved by hearing of the stories of how weather has changed and how these weather catastrophes have increased in the last 14 years. And instead of just kind of running and hiding or shirking it and saying, well, some adult is going to handle it, whatever, she actually started absorbing lots of information about it. She started reading and speaking with people to learn as much as she can. She started pulling data on her own, and she just essentially became an expert in the field. But amongst all her many, many feats, I was probably the most impressed by the fact that before she was able to talk to any world leader or climate change leader or lead this huge movement, she had to convince her parents. Now, if you are someone who, like myself, I have trouble towing the line of providing depth and providing knowledge and sometimes debating points with parents, because I toe the line of I get very impassioned. How far do I go? So I actually avoid correcting my parents most of the times. I just let them be wrong if they're wrong, and I just don't bother, because I'm like, they're who they are, and they're never going to see what I'm saying, because they're always going to look at, are you talking back? so and so when she said that she first had to convince her parents, I felt for her, but I was very proud of her. And hey, she inspired me. One of the things that she said her parents said to her every time this topic came up was, everything is going to be fine. Somebody will do something about it. And we're going to come back to that point. But this actually shocked me, because the first I heard of Greta Thunberg, I actually personally thought that she was just raised by climate change activists, or one of her parents was a meteorologist. I just assumed she had some kind of guidance in her work. I thought that this is something that she was being raised up in, and that's why it mattered to her. To find out that she is actually the leader in her own household in this area as well was really shocking. And it just goes to show how impassioned she was about it. But I found it to be particularly inspiring when she said her parents told her someone will do something about it, and she saw it as a personal goal. I was very proud of her in that moment. I don't even know her. One of the quotes that she dropped during her episode was, quote, I can do so much. One person can do so much. I should try to do everything I can to try to change things. So I promised myself that I was going to do everything I could to try and stop this. Good for her. She also took us through her journey of taking action. So she let us know what inspired her, what got her riled up, but how did she choose to take action? What was her next step? And she started by striking. She started striking at the Swedish parliament. And after a while of giving up her lunch breaks, and then eventually she started just striking on Fridays. She didn't go to school on Fridays. People started to join her. And she saw this as a super, super positive thing, because prior to her striking, she saw young people as lazy and self-centered, and she was happily proven wrong in that notion. She also posted on social media that some journalists came to see her where she was and to interview her. And their interviews were very in-depth, but her responses were just so clear and concise and so measured, and the way that she delivered her statements, I just found her to be such an enjoyable person to watch, but so inspiring overall. After they started documenting her interviews, she started putting them on social media and just kind of keeping up with her activism on social media, or including her activism on her social media, so that people could keep up. More people joined her, and then people in other cities began to demonstrate as well. She went viral, or the protest became viral, and then it spread to other countries. She also shared with us some of the obstacles that she's faced in doing this type of work. And that's actually what was my question the entire episode up until this point, I was wondering, like, what are some of her challenges? She's so young. Like with myself, I can just hop in my car and go down the street or pay for something I need or whatever. But people forget that children don't have a lot of resources at their disposal. So to do this work in and of itself is difficult, but to do it with limited resources, and a lot of the rooms that she needs to be in typically have an age limit, if not a height limit. So she's already facing so many obstacles as a child. It's just incredible to see what she's been able to do with a poster board and a black marker. But some of the other obstacles that she's faced were the fact that she had to stop going to school on Fridays so that she could protest. And she said it was a problem at first, but after a while it became a habit and the school worked with her on that. And then she stopped going to school. Well, she gave up her lunch breaks first, and then it was her Fridays. And then eventually she took a sabbatical for a year so that she could dedicate herself to traveling and speaking with world leaders regarding climate change. She said something that people often ask her is, who do you think you are? Or that's the tone that they give her. She is a child, and she is doing something that adults struggle with doing, is standing in their own self-worth. And when people ask her, who do you think you are? She tells them, she says, I am very stubborn. And when I'm passionate about something, I fully commit. I'm so impressed with her, like I'm beyond words. She also spoke bravely about her depression. And I found this to be particularly inspiring because, one, we're slowly seeing the normalization of speaking about mental health in a way that does not stigmatize people who suffer from mental illness or any type of mental impairment whatsoever. So I'm glad to see that this is becoming more commonplace. But also, have you met children? Kids often struggle to identify emotions overall. So many kids struggle to just simply identify when they're actually angry or if they're hungry, or if they're actually sad or if they're tired. So many kids struggle with identifying emotions in general. For her to have the awareness and the wherewithal to be able to not only identify I was falling into a depression, but to also accurately pull her, not I don't want to say pull herself out of it, but to accurately start to treat her depression by finding value in her work and removing the hopelessness that she felt by making action her priority was so inspiring. It also showed that young people care. We have to live in the world that people leave behind. And at every generation, I feel like we go through that moment of like, did y'all really give us this nonsense? Are y'all serious? Y'all really let us inherit these problems? Why didn't you do something about it? And that's the energy I get from her. And I completely 100% agree with her. She also said that one of the excuses that she hears from people when she's, reaching out and trying to, continue to bring people in to kind of help the cause, one of the excuses that she hears is, quote, it's just too late for me. Maybe I should have gotten into this 5 years ago, but right now it's just too late. Well, Greta brought the data. And amongst that data shows that if you get in now, you're actually getting in early. So she holds your feet to the fire. She literally said it is never too late to do as much as you can. She also went on to say that one of the scariest parts of the climate crisis is that for her, the future is unclear. And she truly feels like she will be doing this type of work for a long time. And that makes me sad for her because she shouldn't have to. She also took that sabbatical year away from school, and she was able to travel to all of her appointments without flying. One of the things that she also said, one of the quotes that she dropped was, quote, I'm doing what I think is right, and I don't compromise. I think more people need to have that mindset. Not necessarily unwilling to listen, but when you know that what you know is true and right, and you're doing the right thing, and people come in and try to deny science, and they try to deny data, and they try to say, well, I don't like the way that sounds, so I'm going to choose to not believe it, and I'm going to choose to think that you're wrong, even though you have data to support your opinion or you have data to support your stance. You have to stand up in it, and you have to call them to the carpet. We can't just simply say it's a difference of opinion. Amongst those topics is one, yes, climate change is not a matter of difference of opinion. Climate change is actually happening. It's happening. It's measurable. Racism is happening. It's measurable. It's not an opinion. It's fact. There's statistics. There's research. There's data to support the fact that Black people are oppressed. It's fact. COVID was real. It's fact. There's data. There's doctors. So when we know what we're talking about, one of the things Greta mentioned was there's always going to be a detractor. You don't have to sit and engage them. You just have to move on. And she's 100% right. She said that she's most inspired by people who protest in areas where it's discouraged or illegal. And that actually struck me because right now in Iran, there are protests and lots of oppression, and there needs to be a global spotlight on what's going on in Iran. There also needs to be a global spotlight with what's going on in the US prison system, a global spotlight. In addition to that, there was this really funny moment where Greta is walking into a summit and she's getting her things put away and she's getting her stuff put down. And she seems very normal, like just calm, just chill, like she's just getting ready for the day. And when she turns around, she lays eyes on the orange Cheeto. And I won't say his name because I don't want to call his people over here to my channel because I cannot stand those people. But he walks in, toupee and all, boisterous and all stance and no depth. And that girl shoots him a look that could have killed an entire army. She shot that man a look. I howled. I was cackling. I laughed so hard because she just goes from calm to just like a switch. Like, when I see you, it was the most on site. She gave him that it's on sight when I see you look, and it cracked me up. She folded those arms and she closed those eyes up at him. I could not stop laughing. And I was like, you know what? If looks can kill, he would be on that floor, toupee and all. He better be glad looks cannot, because she had him in her crosshairs. I thought that scene was so funny. Also, she said that her hope for the next generation is for the next generation to be very pushy and to be very annoying and to annoy the older generation so much that they will have to do something. And lastly, she left us with this quote. She said, "The one thing we need more than hope is action, because once we start to act, hope is everywhere." I could not agree more, but what I will say is Greta Thunberg did not like the word hope when she was talking to multiple rooms of people. Like, she said it in different ways. Each time she basically was like, stop telling me to have hope and help me by giving your action, putting your action behind your message. Don't keep telling me to have hope. I shouldn't have to have hope if we're all working together to make sure that there's a solution. And she was so impassioned in one of her speeches when she was up on stage and had that mic. When she finished, I'm telling you, something in me was breaking. I just was trying so hard to like not cry. Like, she was just so inspiring, and just watching this child inherit the world's problems and to rise above, to speak to people who can be very intimidating. These are all very adult, very accomplished people, and have to essentially put them in their place. That took a lot of guts. I was very, very proud of her. Like, you would have thought that was my family or friend. I was just very proud of her. It was really nice to get to know more about her story. And I am excited to continue to watch her continue to push forward in her area of activism. Episode 3 gave us Bryan Stevenson. If you have not heard of him, you are not alone. I actually had not heard of Bryan Stevenson before this episode, and I'm very shocked at that, considering I have been for a very long time a huge supporter of the prison reform movement. There's just so much about our prison system and our jail system and our judicial system overall that needs a huge overhaul. We just need to sweep out these dirty corners, and we definitely need to do something about the rampant racism that is running our legal system and running our prisons, but also the many, many laws that protect racism in our society today. So Bryan Stevenson is a human rights attorney and a social activist. He's appealed the cases of over 100 death row inmates. He also founded the Equal Justice Initiative of Montgomery, Alabama, and he's a leading voice for criminal justice reform. We started this off with an amazing quote from him, and he says, quote, "We have a system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent." When he said that, I immediately knew, like, whoa. So he's here to be honest. I'm gonna like this Stevenson guy. Okay. So he took us through the origins of his life's work, and it began in 1989, um, when he was just getting his office set up, and he got a call from someone named Herbert Richardson. And this person asked him for help. And at first he was like, I don't have any employees. I don't have any resources right now. I'm not going to be able to help. And the guy, was like, okay, and let go and hung up. And then the next day he called back and asked him again. And he essentially pleaded with him to help him. And although he was understaffed and under-resourced, he decided to try everything he could to appeal this man's case, to try and get a stay. I forgot what it's called, but basically, so that he at least wasn't killed. He would stay in prison, but at least give them time to appeal his case and to try his case again and to do what he could to try and get him off. This person was innocent, according to him. And so he went on to make every attempt possible, but he was denied. And before long, it was his execution day. And so he went to stay with Herbert, and he told him, one of the things Herbert said to Brian was, quote, "It's been such a strange day. They have asked me, what can I do to help more in the last 14 hours of my life than they did in the first 19 years of my life." And so we get a little background of Herbert's life up until that point, all the way up from the time he was a baby to the time that he was accused of a crime. And I'm happy that the documentary was very careful about the verbiage used when talking about the people in this segment in particular, because a lot of times when it comes to a convicted criminal, there's no consideration for the individual behind that conviction. And when the statistics broke down of how many innocent people get executed all the time, it is important to remember that beyond everything else, these are still human people. And as Brian Stevenson said, you are more than your worst decision. And it's his job to amplify the person outside of that really poor decision and to call attention to those things, not the worst thing you ever did. He also hit us with another quote. "The death penalty isn't about whether we deserve to die. I don't think that's the relevant threshold question. I think the relevant threshold question is, do we deserve to kill?" And that has long been where my stance has fallen. So he takes us through his early influences, and this is something that struck me. It is so easy to get into a box. It is so easy to get into your own space and just, I don't want to say think the world revolves around you, but it's really easy to just fall into a life that only involves what's in your line of sight. But seeing how young Brian Stevenson is and hearing him talk about segregation and the end of segregation in his neighborhood, every time we are faced with just how recent segregation, the civil rights movement, Jim Crow, how recent these things were, it always shocks and baffles me that people still deny racism, considering it's literally the people who were doing it, them, their parents, their grandparents, aunts and uncles, that are saying it not only never happened, but it doesn't happen today. But when I see how recent it was, it always just kind of knocks me back every single time. He talks about his grandmother in such a way that I just felt like so many people could resonate with that. Just like how his grandmother knew he would be going into these extremely toxic environments when his school got integrated. She didn't know what to expect, so she would just give him these very tight hugs to try and give him courage to make it through the day. One of the things he said was his mission in his early life was to represent his community well, because he remembers when integration came to their community, and he wanted to make sure that he represented himself and his community to the best of his ability and beyond the lack of representation that he had had up until that point and the people that he would be going to school with. He hit us with another quote. It said, "We're often too focused on the debates and the issues. We're not listening for the narratives underneath the debates and the issues. So I think we have to change that narrative. I'm trying to change the narrative of racial inequality in America. We're not free in America. We're burdened by history of racial inequality that's created a kind of smog in the air. And we've practiced silence for so long that we're going to have to disrupt that silence by talking about things that we haven't talked about before." And I noted this quote, although it is a long quote, it hit me so hard because I feel like I say this in many different ways all the time. Ignoring problems won't make them go away. As a matter of fact, the more you ignore it, the bigger it becomes. Because if you would take the opportunity to undercut the problem in the beginning, to address the core issue, to find a solution, and to move forward, you would rid yourself of this phantom in the dark that's following you everywhere because you refuse to address a very pertinent issue. And just because you have the ability to turn a blind eye to an issue doesn't mean that other people do. The people who are oppressed by this issue don't have the option to tune out or to say, "This is a little too heavy for me today. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it." Right. But these people are actually in jail. These people are actually in prison. These people are actually facing their impending mortality, sometimes down by the day. And they don't have the option to just check out when it's easy and convenient. One of the things that this segment also pushed forward, which I was very glad about, is that a lot of Black people, I don't want to say all because I know then people will say, "I lived in this neighborhood and I was always treated well." That's great. And there are so many one-off situations, but that's not the rule, that's the exception. Far too many people in America, too many Black people in America, understand what it's like to know that every time I get in my car, if I make a move that's the wrong move, or I get accused of making the wrong move, or I just catch somebody on their worst day, it could be the end of my life. And then there would be a debate about whether I deserved what I got. Will justice actually be served? But regardless of justice being served, it doesn't bring the life back. And every day Black people have to go into the world and not sure of, will today be the day? And that's not fair. They also then get into the work that he's done and some of the more intense parts of his work. At the 13-minute and 53-second mark, I strongly believe this is an opportunity for Netflix to put up a trigger warning. Probably should put it up at the 13-minute 50-second mark and leave it there until after, because there is an image that I don't think people should see. It's an image of a lynching, and it just pops up. And I don't think these types of images, especially with Black people, considering there just seems to be this ease of showing Black people once they've passed. There just seems to be this super laissez-faire attitude about the abuse of Black people and Black people's bodies once they've passed that is just so common in our media. And that should not be the case. We should show the same respect to all humans and be very mindful of the person who has passed and respecting their memory and their legacy, but also to the people who are left behind and have to see it, as well as their families. In addition to that, he also walked us through how the country as we know it now, as it stands, was created based on genocide of the Native people. And he spoke about how that is just intertwined, considering a lot of people like to use the narrative of that this is not a systemic problem and this is not a historical problem. It's just a bad people versus good people problem. But when the actual place where you live was built on the oppression of you and others who are similar to you, you can't deny that the thread is part of who everybody who works in that system or promotes that system actually is, unless you actively work against it. And he mentioned how the genocide of Native people was used to highlight racial differences and in some way use that to demonize and justify the oppression and the abuse of non-white people. And this has continued to be what amplifies the abuse of Black people as well. But the way that we are oppressed is based on history. We were never brought here to be citizens. So America has always had a struggle and a fight for recognizing us as actual human beings, because when we got here, that was never their intent. We were brought here with a clear purpose. And when that purpose was disrupted, which was to oppress us, America had no idea what to do with us. And so I was glad that he had a moment where he talked about that connection between, the genocide of Native people and the oppression and the abuse and the slavery of Black people. He ended with this quote, "You have to stay on the side of love. It's not easy, but if you allow yourself to be consumed by hatred and anger, it will actually disrupt your ability to love even the people who are not your enemies, who are not perpetrating these atrocities. And then you end up in this place where love is diminished. And when that happens, you don't get to be a full human being." I thought that was a very beautiful statement, and it's true. You have to continue to recognize your own humanity, and you are not the culmination of things that have been done to you. You are the culmination of you, your character, your experiences, your integrity, your passion, your morals. Those are you. What other people do is them. Now, I will say, don't take no shit. But what I will say is, you leave people with their own trash. You leave people with the stench of their own shortcomings, and don't you take it with you. That does not represent you. It represents them. And for episode 4, this is the last episode that's going to be covered in this part 1 video, and we're going to get to 5, 6, and 7 in the next video. But for episode 4, we talked with Jacinda Ardern. Now, again, I was familiar with Jacinda Ardern, but I don't think I've ever had this much exposure to her because she is in New Zealand. But Jacinda Ardern is actually the youngest female world leader. She is the 3rd female Prime Minister of New Zealand, and she is currently the Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's also the leader of the Labour Party and the 2nd elected leader in history to have a baby while in office, which we are going to get to in a minute. Overall, I found Jacinda Ardern to be such a breath of fresh air to watch and to listen to. Her voice is so sweet and so empathetic. There's just a kindness that boils over with her. And I will say this was excellent placement of this episode. Episode 3 was incredibly good. It was probably my favorite episode of the series, but I felt like it was a little tough because it hit home in so many ways. As a Black person from the South, I felt like that was the one that kind of had the ability to trigger me the most. So it was so nice to get to Jacinda Ardern's episode, which was kind of like a palate cleanser. She had so much depth. She had so much impact, but her overall disposition of just kindness and gentility, it was just really nice. I would love to be in a country that is led by her. I can say that for sure, for a number of reasons. But she talked about her origins, and she said she joined her political party as a teenager. She was 17 because she wanted to change the world and she wanted to do something that can make a difference, even though she said it looked like people who were in politics, they weren't that nice and they didn't have that much of a happy life, as she put it. But she talked about how the leader of her party stepped back 7 weeks before the election. And she had 7 weeks to run to be a prime minister. And she just gave it her all, although she was hopeful. She was not at any point confident that she would win. She said she didn't realize that she would be a prime minister until the day she got elected. The day before, she was just kind of like, well, we're going to give it our best shot, but who knows? But one of the quotes that she said was, quote, "Not being afraid to be kind or be really driven by empathy as a leader." I love this because as a woman, when you enter a leadership position, people like to impose all these protocols and rules and recommendations and tips. And you got to always stand with your back firm and don't wear pink and don't wear yellow and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it would be nice if we could just exist. It would be nice if we could just be nice. And the thing is, the presence of kindness does not indicate the lack of presence of assertiveness. They can coexist. She was very assertive. She was very polished, but she was also very kind, and she was above all else human. She talked about how her greatest challenge as a prime minister were the terrorist attacks at Christchurch. She talked in depth about that. I felt like we kept coming back to that, but the way she handled that was absolutely heart inspiring, but also kind of heartbreaking when she hugged that one lady and she kind of squealed in her tears. That was really tough. But instead of walking away, you saw what she did. She held her tighter. It was a very beautiful moment, and I think that represented who she is and who she's always been as a leader, but also as a person. She also mentioned, when talking about how, in her country, she has made moves. They've banned assault rifles or assault weapons after the mass shooting. She wasted no time. They also had a swift and successful COVID response, and they were examples, prime examples during the entire pandemic of how it can be done right. And one of the things that she said in response to people asking her about that was, there will always be detractors to what you do. Acknowledge when you don't feel tough enough to face that and when you need to check out. So many people love to push the narrative of like, you have to be tougher than your opposition. You have to stand firm. The only way to prove your strength is through grit and suffering and withstanding in the face of adversity. But we are human, we're not robots. And what I loved most about her episode was that it was just a reminder to be human, even when things feel insurmountable. The Christchurch shootings were an absolute catastrophe, and you can tell that she carries the weight of that human loss with her. Another moment that it should be more commonplace, but when she went to Christchurch, she covered her head. I know that there's an exception given to a lot of political leaders and official people when they go into these spaces, if they're going for like, quote, official business. But when you respect the laws of the land, or you respect the environment that you're in, that says so much about your outlook on humanity. She is an extremely humane person. She sees her citizens as one. And then when she went and apologized because you should have been treated better here, that just everything about her is so genuine. I just found her episode to be so enlightening. I also found this quote when she was discussing the laws banning semi-automatic weapons. This quote I found was, she said, Australia experienced a massacre and changed its laws. New Zealand has had its experience and changed its laws. I don't understand the United States. And when I tell you, she just put a microphone to my thoughts, because I completely agree. Overall, I thought her approach to leadership as a human first, as a joyful person first. I think the way you manage a team or a country or any position of leadership, the way you manage and carry yourself bleeds through to every end of the company. And that's why you have the phrase, the fish stinks from the head, because how you lead and manage dictates the success and the health of that environment. So if you are quote unquote assertive, or you're laying traps to catch people, and you're being oppressive in any way, and yes, manipulation is a form of oppression, yes, covert bullying is still bullying, all of those little tactics and those politics, the misuse of office politics to oppress and control, that bleeds through, which would explain why our country looks the way it does and New Zealand looks the way it does. Their people are just happy, are they not? They just have happy people, just happy people. She also mentioned this, and she didn't make it a point to stop and talk about it, but she said it, and I heard her. She champions mindfulness and meditation. I know two other people who've been championing that same tool, or those same tools, to help you. She ended her segment walking out of the hospital post childbirth. She was happy, glowing, but she was still leading. And something that I loved that she said, she was communing with everyone. She was thanking everyone for the well wishes. She was put together. She was polished. She was just happy. Her and her husband were just joyful. But something that I recognized that I loved that she said was, I'm going to maintain some privacy for the things that we've received in celebration, and just keep those things for us. I love that she asserted that boundary, like, okay, now stop asking me. But she's still very kind, and she let people in to a certain point, and she still maintained her boundaries. It is possible to do both, is to let people in and still maintain your safety and the integrity of your experiences. I just found her to be a light. That was probably like one of the best episodes they were all really good, don't get me wrong, but I found episode 4 to just feel inspiring overall, but also induce a lot more hopeful that seeing more female leaders could create more countries who were just like New Zealand and happy. Like, we don't have to have mass shootings every week. We shouldn't be buying bulletproof backpacks. So I found Jacinda Ardern to be an excellent leader, and I look forward to watching her career and her impact continue to evolve. So, what are your thoughts on the first 4 episodes? Found this documentary yet again to be amazing, inspiring, to provide a lot of information, but also depth. It's just good to see this type of work being done from the right place. It turns out different when it's done from a place of actual care and empathy and kindness, right? Like, it doesn't just look like a pomp project, like, oh, I'm gonna cut a ribbon or put dirt on a place and say I planted a tree. Like, this is like a real inspiring tool for people who are looking to get into activism, and also to continue to be exposed to activism and the different types of activism. One of the best things about this documentary is that it's so diverse in many ways. It doesn't just face 1 or 2 issues. It hits hard hitting real social issues, real legal issues, real community issues, real global issues. And I find this documentary so far, especially these first 4 episodes, to really be setting up for a long-standing series. I hope Live to Lead continues with seasons, and there's so many people to highlight and so many issues to bring awareness to, and there's so much that can be done with a platform like this. So I'm excited to see this continue to evolve. Again, we're only going to talk about the first 4 episodes today, and then tomorrow I am going to be posting my thoughts on episodes 5, 6, and 7, as well as my overall thoughts on the production overall. So let me know what your thoughts are for episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4. I am excited to hear what your thoughts are. I hope you have an amazing, happy New Year's Eve. I hope you celebrate tonight and stay safe and have a great time. And don't forget, if you're going to clean your house this weekend, clean it today. Don't clean it tomorrow. Don't run your washing machine or your dishwasher tomorrow. Just a little tip for bringing in some good luck. Thank you so much for watching. If you have not already, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on that notification bell. If you are interested in becoming a member, hit the join button. And if you want to see what I'm doing over on Patreon, go ahead and use the link in the description box below. This is my last video of 2022. It has been an amazing year. It has been so great, and I cannot wait to see what 2023 has in store. Don't forget to like on your way out, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.